Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS-collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 288. Today, I'm joined by Justin Hollandsworth, and we're talking chasing down big deer and drifting tracks. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. It is 1 week closer to fall. And finally, actually, my fall is set. I know what I'll be doing. The draw results came out for Kansas this past weekend, and I drew a Kansas tag again this year. So super stoked for that. I was kind of on the fence, actually, to be honest. It was one of those things where, not going to lie, man, the price of gas and things like that, it was in the back of my mind. I think I might have mentioned this before, is that thought was kind of creeping in, like, wouldn't be so terrible this year if I didn't draw Kansas and actually stuck around closer to home for this fall, for the entirety of the fall. But I actually put in for the draw, before we kind of knew what was going to happen, and with gas prices and all those types of things. So I'm not going to complain. Kansas is a super cool place to hunt. Have been looking forward to going back there actually since I left in November empty-handed. It's just a super cool place to hunt. I really enjoyed being on the ground, hunting on the ground. And now, this time around, I have a little better idea of what I'm doing, and have a little better idea where I need to focus on in terms of finding deer. So I have a little bit more of a game plan than I had last year. Last year I was out there for right around 2 weeks. It was like 14, 15 days, something like that. This year it'll probably more around like the 7, 8 kind of days, just because I have a little bit of familiarity, and because I'm going to Idaho for the elk hunt at the end of August as well. So I don't have quite as much time to spend in Kansas as I had the previous year. So those are my hunt plans for the year. I'll do a podcast here coming up, in the next few weeks or some time over the summer, where we're really kind of detailed, like the plans and the goals for the upcoming year. But right now it's Idaho. So super stoked for that. Chase some elk with my buddy Wilson, and then as soon as I get back from that trip, I guess early September, I'll be back. And then just, I think 2 weeks after that, I think my area in PA opens up. So I'll be chasing whitetails then during the part of the early season into October in PA, getting up to that big woods piece a little bit. And then off to Kansas after that. If something happens crazy and I end up tagging out somewhere early, I might try to slip something else in. But for right now, that is the plan. I haven't completely committed to what week I'm going to go to Kansas yet. I'm probably going to go the same time frame I went last year, at least to start the hunt. It was like, I think the second week of November was when I is when I got out there and started hunting. I think I'm probably going to do the same thing again this year. That just felt like that first week, it just felt, pretty slamming as far as the activity. We had a nice flurry the first kind of handful of days we were there. And then like the back end of that first week, it started kind of dying off a little bit. So what I may end up doing is just maybe spending some time that first week in November here in PA, maybe up in that Big Woods piece, because I got a good bead on some things for at least that first week in November. So may end up doing that if something doesn't shake out before that. But I'll put the final details of that together here in the next couple of months. Have a little bit of time, but at least now I know where I'm headed, and there's not really any guesswork. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. Have a cool show for you guys today. Have on Mr. Justin Hollandsworth. I'm sure a lot of you folks out there know of Justin, know of his handiwork. He's one of those dudes that if you're not familiar, you should probably get familiar pretty quick. Guy kills hammers. I mean, just to put it in the shortest and simplest terms, he's one of those dudes that, finds a target buck and focuses primarily on a single deer and will chase that deer down and surgically remove him from the landscape. He's of the kind of DeQuisto family tree, if you will. A lot of his approach is very similar to what you would think of in terms of Andre and things like that. And he's had a close relationship with Andre for a bunch of years, so it's not a surprise. And he's oftentimes killing a lot of his deer in that October timeframe where people just feel like maybe it can't get done, but he consistently does it and does it on hammer bucks. Some of the stuff we talk about today is, as you would imagine, is just his approach to kind of tracking down a singular deer. One of the things we touched on, and we get kind of deep into is really kind of the idea of, he used to run dogs a lot when he was a kid, and that was really kind of where he cut his teeth. And so we start talking about how coon dogs specifically, will drift tracks, and his kind of thinking on how deer might use tracks and track scent, things that he learned from working dogs, and how that kind of really plays into how he thinks about access, whether he's accessing a farm or a knock on door permission. That's a lot of what he hunts is a lot of knock on door permission. He did just recently buy his own farm, his first farm of his life. And but prior to that, I mean, primarily what he hunts is just knock on door permission. So he's not, really able to set it up necessarily, and has to do a lot of the scouting, figuring it out. And we talk about his process for that, and that it's not necessarily turnkey where he walks in and just kind of knows what's happening. Like anyone else, it's a process for him, and he goes through his process of understanding access, where the deer want to be, and how he can surgically kind of remove the best deer on that property when he tracks that deer down or when he finds that deer. So that's essentially what we talk about today. Super cool conversation. Justin's just a good salt of the earth kind of dude. One of those guys I'm sure I will stay in touch with for a long, long time, and hope you guys dig the chat as much as I did. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into the show. As always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I've got on Mr. Justin Hollandsworth. What's going on, man? How are you?
Good. I'm excited to be on. I've been listening to your podcast for a long time.
Man, I truth be told, man, I should have had you on a lot sooner. You've been like one of the guys. I always say this to folks. I have but so many weeks in a year to try to get people on, and I try to time it to where, guys like yourself that are just have a wealth of information, that I time it to where people can actually use it. You know what I mean? So where,
yeah,
I try to cover different things, like as it gets into late season and like the off season, where it's more, focused on shed hunting or whatever the case is. But like the real guys like you that are real tacticians and real strategists and stuff like that, I always like to have them on during the summer and then into the fall, like leading into like those prime times where people really use the information. So hence it's taken me a few years to finally get you on, but I'm glad you're here, man.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be on. Like I said, I've listened for a long time. You've had some of my good friends on, Troy Pottinger, Byron Horton, I think's been on. I mean, there's been a few of my good buddies been on there.
Yeah. Troy's a good dude, man. He, that guy's scrape game is next level, dude. I adopted the Pottinger method, last year for sure. And am seeing in the brief period of time that I was able to implement it last year, I started seeing the rewards already. And then Byron's
Oh,
just
it for sure works.
yeah, for sure. There's no turning back now. And Byron's just a good dude, kills great deer.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really like about him is we're both kind of gear nerds a little bit, and he's always looking for like the DIY everyday guy. How can I make this as cheap as possible? Because I got a family, I got to put gas in my car. Like I love
Yeah,
that. I love
yeah,
that about him.
yeah. That's definitely him for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Pinching pennies, man. That guy would rub two pennies together and come out with a dime. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
that's
yeah, oh yeah.
nice, nice. Well, man, I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there listening that have heard of you, know who you are, or have seen some of the stuff that you've laid down on video. But for anyone out there that's listening that doesn't know who you are, would you mind just giving them a little bit of background about yourself? Where you live, what you do for a living?
Okay. So born and raised in Ohio. Kind of live more in the central part of the state, but grew up in the northern part of the state. Like a lot of guys, my grandfather got me into hunting, and I just kind of progressed over the years. And never went to college. I just went into the trades right out of high school, and I was a drywall hanger, metal stud framer, and that's that's what I cut my teeth on. That's how I made my living, and then slowly over time, just kind of worked up, and was a journeyman carpenter to a foreman to a project manager. Now all these years later, like, which is crazy to say, it's like 27, 28 years now in the business. Now I'm a vice president of operations for a commercial drywall metal studs company.
Nice, nice.
And yeah, I just always went off the theory of like, I'm just gonna outwork everybody.
Yeah, yeah, man. I mean, that's one of those things where, it's funny. My wife and I have this conversation sometimes. Just, we have a daughter. She's 13, and what she might do after. Right, it's never too early to kind of think about what she might get into once she's done with high school and stuff like that. And we're always kind of the mind where, I don't want to pressure her to think that she has to necessarily go to college so long as she's committed to whatever it is she's gonna do. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think to me that's the thing that you can't buy. You know what I mean? Like you can go buy yourself an education, and not saying it's not worth something. Like I went and got one, right? So and it's worked out for me, but it's also a combination of I did that, but I also am willing to work. And it's not necessarily the route that you have to take, and that's kind of the the impression I want to leave with her is that whatever it is you want to do, if you're willing to put the time into it and the effort into it, you can make of it whatever it is you want to make of it, but without that, doesn't matter what route you take, you're not going to find success, which very true in the deer world as well, man.
For sure.
So you mentioned your grandfather kind of got you started. So was he big into deer hunting? I know a lot of guys, and it's funny because a lot of guys that I know, like yourself, that are killers, I find it kind of interesting that a lot of them started off similarly, kind of how you mentioned, like grandfather got him into it, but they started off really kind of focused on small game, where big game wasn't necessarily the introduction, I guess you could say. And even it wasn't necessarily the addiction early on per se, as much as it was just the introduction to woodsmanship and the outdoors.
Yeah, he was, he was a little more, he was a traditional archer.
Okay.
Is what he liked, but he always gun hunted. And then we always went down to West Virginia too for like rifle season too. Growing up as a kid, like I remember sitting in that little cabin and and during like around Thanksgiving and stuff like that, and that was a big deal to him and I. Usually it was just him and I that did that trip by ourselves, and he wasn't a trophy hunter. I mean, I remember, he would always say, yeah, if a big one comes along, I'd shoot it. But he would just more or less going out there, fill the freezer, and I just tagged along. I think I was 7 or 8 years old, and my dad, who was not a hunter, but put a little drive on behind my grandpa's house during gun season. I was little. I mean, I was seriously probably 7, 8 years old. and my dad pushed a doe out to my grandpa, and my grandpa shot this doe, and literally it was like the first or second time I'd ever gone deer hunting, and I seen that, and I was hooked from that day forward. I mean, I loved it. I just loved hunting. Like I loved squirrel hunting and rabbit hunting, and I got into trapping for a while, and then and I bow hunted, and then I got into bow hunting like later on when I was a teenager, and it's just I didn't have like a real good teacher, or like he he was he hunted, but then by that point in time he was having some health issues and stuff like that. So
Right.
I was kind of just going out and doing my own thing, and trying to figure it out, and reading every magazine I could possibly get my hands on, especially anything that Miles Keller was in. Then I was definitely buying that magazine.
Right.
And so then I remember I'd seen some big ones, had some encounters, just blew them, just because I couldn't keep my shit together basically, and just fall apart in the moment, because you almost couldn't believe your eyes when it was starting to happen, kind of thing. And then I think I just kind of gravitated later because I just didn't have the success I was looking for early on, and I got really into coon hunting and raising and training competition dogs. That was like I was way into that for a while. And I ran dogs and competed in hunts all over the place. And I mean, I think I was like 17 or 18. I took a 10-month-old pup to Walker Days in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I drove this old like piece of shit Toyota truck that I had, and I qualified for it and drove it up there, and almost won the whole thing.
Nice.
With a 10-month-old pup.
Nice. I think
and was like, I was on top of the world then.
Right. I bet, man. I bet. It's funny because I think I saw a picture of a young Justin Hollandsworth with a dog. Not so.
Oh yeah.
And it's interesting, man. So how often? Because Tony Peterson, right, is big into dogs. He hunts all kinds of upland critters and stuff like that. And I've talked to him in the past, and he's just like, Clint. He's like, you wouldn't believe the type of deer habitat in the odd places that I jump the biggest bucks, and I always typically find them whenever I'm bird hunting somewhere. Did you kind of come across similar things when you were working dogs a lot? I mean, did you just run across all types of kind of odd, kind of out of the way places you would never think there would be a big buck hold up, and by God, there you go, there's a giant there, and I just bumped him while I was quail hunting or whatever the case was?
Oh, for sure. I mean, well, I didn't do a lot of quail hunting, a lot of pheasant hunting. Mine was mostly coon hunting, which was at night.
Right.
But I still ran into some, giant deer that I jumped out of, like, a fence row in the middle of, just 500 acres of just wide open fields.
Right.
Or just a little swale, in the middle of nowhere, just some odd places for sure. I can tell you this, when you're out there, because I'd be out there in October, November coon hunting, and I tell you what, I see some giant deer. And I mean, I still recall a giant. Now, I mean, and maybe this deer is not as big as what he is in my mind today, but you know how when you're a kid, like what you think is big and now what you might think is big. But I remember this deer walking within 10 or 15 yards of me while I was standing in a bean field by myself one night listening to my dog. And he came up on me, and it was in November, and I mean, and he was just swelled up and huge, and he actually made me really nervous because he acted like he wasn't scared of me at all.
Right.
And he was, in my mind, like that deer, in my mind looks like the hole in the horn deer.
Right.
And he might not be, but that's what he looks like in my mind these days, you know?
Right, right. So I'm curious, man, so running dogs, what do you think you took from that experience that has helped you, in your deer hunting as you got older and started, like you said earlier, not necessarily blowing opportunities, but getting on big deer and like kind of sealing the deal. Is there anything that you picked up from running dogs, whether it's being in tune with kind of picking up, animal behaviors, even though dogs is different, of course, but kind of starting to learn like the language of animals, of how when their behavior change and what might create those changes and how that might translate to deer. Is there anything like that that you picked up along the way?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely did. The one thing I will say, the one thing I did pick up pretty early on is like, well, I always noticed like, whenever there was a lot of moisture in the air or anything like that, just the way that a dog could smell was just like, it was like times 10.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was so much better. I mean, it just, and then, or if you were out on, some sub-zero, you know, snowy night, and how, how bad it was for them, how hard it was for them to be able to pick up those tracks and stuff like that. It kind of made me think from a hunting standpoint of at times when I want to get a little, you know, you got to take chances to kill big deer. And there was times where I was like, you know what, like it's super bitter cold. It's not the ideal wind, but I'm going to take the chance because maybe I can get by because they can't smell as good on
Right.
a particular, on a day like that, or on a day where a lot of moisture in the air, stuff like that, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to a farm where there's a lot of deer, and and sometimes that's hard. That's a really hard hunt because what you're trying to get past to get to actually what you want to shoot, um, that can all be blown up real quick, if you're not careful in the way that you go about it. So if you're hunting on one of those days where there's just a ton of moisture in the air and stuff like that, just being really methodical on like understanding the wind and the thermals and everything and that little spot that you're going to go to and how you're going to get there and understanding like what's going to cross your tracks and stuff like that, knowing that they can smell twice as good today than they typically can.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely picked up a lot of that from dogs,
Yeah.
over the years.
It's interesting. I forget who I had on a while ago, and we were talking about, I don't remember how we got on the topic, but we were talking about precipitation, just weather related to deer movement. And it might have been the guys from MSU Deer Lab, but don't quote me on that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a study that was kind of interesting where it's like when you got further north, like deer would move more often in the rain. It wasn't, I think it was observation, and they didn't necessarily have enough data to make it and they didn't do the study in such a way that they could make it like a concrete finding necessarily. And the deer up north, whenever it got a little bit of precip, like within a certain, volume of rain or type of rain or whatever the case was, the deer activity and movement increased, which I think we all kind of somewhat anecdotally kind of see that as hunters. Like you always kind of like those
Mm-hmm.
little misty, overcasty days, right? Because to your point, it's like some of those days you want to, that where the deer doesn't have the advantage, you want to hunt, but we also know that when they have the advantage is when they're most likely to move. If you have a spot that you can get in and and conceal yourself. But down south, what they found was is that they didn't move nearly as often during the rain, which is interesting. But the higher the humidity day was, it didn't matter necessarily so much the temperature, but the humidity. The higher the humidity was, the more often they would move, or the more active they were.
Oh
Which,
yeah, I
which,
can see that.
yeah, which was kind of interesting. Yeah, because you would think deer are deer. If they liked the rain here, they would like the rain anywhere. But it was the opposite. In south, they liked the humidity, not the rain. Here, they didn't care so much for the humidity, but they liked the rain, which was
Well,
interesting.
what? Well, and I noticed too, like when I was running dogs, that there was a lot of times, say we were like in a drought or something like that, and I was out in the summertime, a lot of my dogs or whatever, and when it was really dry, and we're in a 2, 3, 4 week drought or something like that, where we just haven't really got any rain. I mean, the dogs will struggle a little bit. And being able to consistently, stay on that track, because a good competition coon dog will drift the track. They won't run right on the track. They will drift it. They will use the wind because what they're trying to do, this is what I think anyways, what they're trying to do is they're trying to run the coon down. And they're trying to, ultimately, they would like to catch it on the ground. And some really good competition dogs, a lot of the old timers, they call it, having a hot nose. And so what they would do, instead of running like right, and following that track exactly where the coon went, they would like drift it and cut it off at certain points so they could run it faster and ultimately tree the coon faster. And so, and I noticed, like, on the super dry days like that, like, that just wasn't happening. Like, they would have to work that track exactly where that animal had walked. So it was a little different. I think a deer can drift their track.
I was just thinking of that, and it made me start thinking about access a little differently. Like, so I guess let me just ask you that, like, knowing that, and like the time you spent running dogs, and especially when you start thinking about dogs drifting tracks, and maybe deer are able, or I mean, I'm sure they're able to, because they smell, however many times more, or better than a dog does. How do you kind of, I guess, let me ask it this way. How meticulous is your access, knowing everything that kind of how dogs react and how they drift tracks, and, and taking into consideration how much moisture is in the air and things like that? What extent and what pains do you go through to have clean access, and I guess exit as well?
I worked on that a lot. I mean, to me, well, I'll just say this: I just recently purchased my first farm, and I was really, really set on, like, I wanted northeast access on the farm. And, with preferably like the bedding more towards, the opposite end of the farm, so I could set things up purposely, in a way to get in and out clean, because, if it's a new farm, I would probably spend a little extra time, well, actually a lot more time in the winter walking it and trying to understand how to get in and out of it, and just trying to get the feel of how everything lays. And then I will come into some of those spots and say, yeah, this looks like a great spot, and this is how I'll access it. And I'll have kind of a game plan of, like, how I'm going to, come in, and maybe that's using some terrain features, or maybe there's a ditch or a creek, or maybe there's going to be some standing corn, over there, or whatever. And I'll try to use something to my advantage, just to kind of, to be able to come in and out from a visual standpoint. Sometimes the set thing's tough, because, unless you know the farm and you've spent some time there hunting it, it takes a little time. I sometimes think it takes 2 years to learn a farm. Yeah. Because I think there's times where it's like, that's what a buddy of mine asked me. He was like, he goes, "You think you'll kill a buck on your farm this year?" I said, "No." I said I'd like to. I said that'd be ideal, but I'm like, I don't. I said, I don't even know how the deer really move through that farm yet, because I've never sat in a tree, not one single time yet. Right. So I guess to your point, like, it just depends, it's all situational. But I know I try to do a lot of legwork in February, March, into April, of how I'm going to get in and out of a new farm into areas. Here's the other part of that goes back to, is like, then you go into the season, and sometimes it's like what you see during that time frame is not matching what you're seeing now, and you got to hunt them. You got to hunt the hottest signs. So
Right.
you're gonna throw that out the window sometimes.
Right. And I think that's sometimes where people get hung up, right? Is that,
Mm-hmm.
we all know, that entry and exit is critical. It kills more, your entry or poor access kills more hunts than probably almost anything else for a lot of hunters. And I think sometimes people have a hard time kind of wrapping their head around. It's like, well, if my access has to be so kind of pristine, how can I justify getting down in the middle of a day in scouting for hot sign, and then resetting up and maybe crossing a trail where a deer might want to walk or where a buck might, come through this, thicket or whatever the case is. I think that they sometimes, aren't sure kind of how to wrap their head around that. So how do you mitigate that, right? Because like there's a level of aggression that you want to have to try to put yourself in the right spot or put yourself in the chips, so to speak. There's also a level of care, I guess, that needs to be taken to kind of make those decisions at the right time of day, with the right conditions and so forth. So how do you balance that?
I think it's case by case, and I think it's typically if I'm setting a farm, there's probably a pretty good deer in there.
Mm-hmm.
That I either knew about from the year before, or I glassed in the summer, or night, or I got pictures of, or whatever. Like, but typically going into it with a game plan of like, typically, I mean, on average is like there's only one deer on one particular farm that I'm typically after.
Right.
So if I don't see, I might go in and start somewhere, and it might be from a distance, just to see if I can see something. And then sometimes it's just I kind of use a little bit of approach of like, maybe I'll creep in, a little farther
Mm-hmm.
the next evening, and then I just kind of until I see him or on a camera do a certain thing or something, and then sometimes I worst enemy
Mm-hmm.
too.
Yeah.
Sometimes I even though I know what it takes to get it done, I still sometimes will sometimes pussyfoot around a little bit and not probably make the move that I need to quicker. But I typically want them to show me their cards somehow,
Right.
and then I go. Then, like last year, for example, like that deer showed me. He showed me his cards, and he pushed that doe right back into that bedding area where I had found his shed, and I'm like, and then I went for it, and I killed him.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's one thing that, like, over the course of time of doing this show, and it made me actually think of. I know we mentioned Troy earlier in the
mhm.
in the podcast, but that was one of the things that, I took a lot of things away from just chatting with him and texting with him and stuff like that. But the one thing he really kind of impressed upon me was that, the deer will tell you, will show you if you're paying
Yeah,
if you're paying attention.
yep,
If you're paying attention to the sign, if you're reading it correctly, and if you give them the time, and it may not happen in a given season if you're chasing a particular deer. It might take 2 seasons to put all the puzzle pieces together or whatever. But his point was that if you see all the pieces of the puzzle and you pay attention, they will show you their cards over time, and you will know what that deer is going to do or wants to do, essentially. Which was something that I think sometimes we try. I think maybe we rush to judgment, and maybe we have disparate pieces that seem disconnected at the time, but they're actually connected. We're not sure how they connect. I think
yeah.
that's the biggest kind of the challenge, right? Is that not seeing the connective tissue between them.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened in that case. So I was in there in the morning and I hunted and I seen him come out and he pushed a doe out and he pushed the doe out and he just followed her around out in the field that morning for a little bit, and then he pushed her back into that area where I had found a shed where I thought he might be bedding. So as soon as he did that, because I hunted in the morning, and then I had to go to work, and so I got down and I went over there, and I just kind of did a little poking around, and there was two trails coming out, and they split around this like little water hole or whatever that was in there, and they kind of split coming around that water hole or whatever, but the bigger tracks, there's big tracks coming out on both of those two trails, but I had to split the difference, but splitting the difference meant I was going to be a little farther from whatever one trail that I set up on, with the way the trees were in there. And so when I did that, I kind of hugged the other trail, which was going to give me like a 15 or 20 yard shot. And because there was some good rubs coming down it, rather than the other one. And so I'm like, it just makes sense. The sign, there was more sign on that side of it.
Right.
Well, I set the stand, got out of there, went to work, came back, got back in there, and when the doe stood up, she was about 80 yards. And then I don't know how I didn't see him. Well, honestly, now that I think back on it, I don't know how I didn't see that deer's rack. And then he stood up shortly after that, and then worked those trees. And then when he got up to follow her back to the field where they were feeding in the morning, where he was following her around, instead of taking the trail that I was closest to, they took the other one, which gave you like a 40. It ended up being a 44-yard shot through the timber.
Right. Man.
Which is not what I wanted to do. It was the farthest I've ever shot a whitetail in my life.
Right.
And I could shoot it. I mean, obviously it did on that day, but that was not ideal. That's not what I wanted to do. But that's what the sign was telling me, and I just had to go off of what was there. And then it was funny because I don't know if you do this, but a lot of times after I kill a deer, then I'm like, okay, I really want to go in there and see what was going on.
Yeah.
So I got in there and I was like, oh, God, then it just like, it really makes sense to you. Yeah. And,
yeah,
I could have made that. I could have killed that deer so much quicker than I did, but
yeah, it was like it made me think of the one I shot in Iowa, because like when I finally got up in the business and killed that deer, and then I took a walkabout after I found him, I was like, oh man, like I should have been in here like 5 days ago. I was messing around on the outside trying to, chasing this one particular deer and kept seeing him, but I was always just like I think I told you this when we were talking the other day, but I'd missed him twice, but I would have had a better opportunity if I just would have been a little bit more aggressive and got back where I needed to, back where I found all the sign once I finally took a walkabout. But hindsight's 20/20, I guess. You could almost do that on every single deer, at that point. But I'm curious. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I did a while back. I did a podcast with Mark Kenyon, and I remember he asked me a question at the end of it, and he really kind of threw me for a loop. He had some random questions at the end, and it was like, if you had a billboard, what would it say on there?
Right.
And I remember sitting there thinking, I was like, oh God, what would that say? And I remember thinking, I'm like, sometimes you have to make yourself uncomfortable, and you got to come out of your comfy little box over there, and you can easily as a hunter get trapped into doing things that don't consistently work, because of the fear of failure. I think.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that. I think that you also see, and part of that is that, like, you see people get married to spots because they've shot a deer one place one time. They think, or because they've done that once, they want to do it again and again at the same spot whenever things around them are changing and they need to kind of change either their strategies or their setups or whatever the case is. And I think that that's one of the things that certainly has helped me over time, is just knowing that, I almost kind of go into every season, doing my scouting and stuff like that, and I have some, preconceived ideas of where things could be good, I guess, is maybe one way to say it. And I'll validate that through cameras. And I know you and I talked about this a little bit, but I watch dates pretty closely and stuff like that. And I have a few spots that will turn on around certain time frames and stuff like that. But then beyond those, most of the rest of my season, I usually am in uncomfortable spots that I had found in the off season. And I'm like, man, I'm going to spend time here and I don't know much about it, but I need to learn it. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I'll just kind of do that because, I'm either gonna kill something or I'm gonna learn something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the way I look at it. And either way, it's a positive outcome for me. I don't know if you kind of look at it the same way or not, but
I think it's a great way to look at it. I think it's a great approach because that a lot of times, those times that you may think that you may think that you're not going to get anything out of that hunt or whatever. Sometimes those are the times that you end up picking up something,
yeah.
that is useful further down the road. I've done that a lot over the years.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I started doing, it's helped me with that. And I'm curious if you do any of this, but is I started doing a lot more journaling after hunts, and it's actually helped me, on tough hunts. We'll say it's helped me kind of put a positive spin on it
Mm-hmm.
but also at the same time, I started noticing as I was like writing stuff out, I started noticing like the small little details of the hunt that a lot of times I probably wouldn't have given a second thought. And some of those things have been things that have like maybe was actually that connective tissue that we were talking about before. You know what I mean? Because I would go back and look at like a previous hunter. I would go check some trail cameras after I wrote that stuff down and go, oh man, when that deer came through here, it was around the same temperature, same wind conditions, and man, you know what? The humidity was the same, or whatever it was. I started kind of putting the smaller pieces together, and
So would you? So then you go back and you look at those notes later when you hunt that particular area or a particular deer.
yeah, well, both, yeah,
Yeah,
both,
both.
yeah, because because not always. I mean, you know this as well as anybody does, but not always will. Each deer has its own personality, so they're going to use areas slightly differently or whatever the case
Mm-hmm.
is. But I can draw pretty good analogs to get a good sense, of how they might use an area or how they might kind of act in an area. And then just generally speaking, I'll look at the spot, like the specific spot in the conditions relative to that and how that might play out in another spot that might be a mile and a half away, and see if maybe there's any connection there, a deer behaving the same way in those spots based on, on those same conditions or not. And then I'll go back to trail camera data and just look at deer in general. So beyond just a single deer, I'll look at like all shooter bucks for that spot and be like, how did they react in this particular spot with those conditions? Did they all do the same thing? Did they do different things? Is it consistent with what I've seen a mile away? And I just start to try to put those pieces together to see if there's any kind of trends that start to pop out at me that I can start to use. And that's how I've kind of narrowed down some spots specifically, like around dates, around, wind conditions. Especially there's one area, it's like, if it's not overcast, I probably won't hunt it, just because over time it's like I've watched it and have watched the deer use it. I've watched shooters use it. I've had some decent encounters there, and it's always been with overcast days, especially if there's like a little bit of mist in the air. That's when it's been the best historically, around like a 3 or 4 day window. And so that spot there, it's like I don't even touch it until like I get that.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome. So, see, the one part of it I probably don't do is I always end up probably keeping more of the trail camera. I'll keep every picture of a particular deer
Mm-hmm.
and build a file on them. But I probably don't go, which I probably should, go into depth quite like you do with keeping the notes on, the conditions and so on and so forth. Because I bet you there is a lot of times that you come across notes that you wrote down that I know, I'm sure that me not doing that, I'm probably forgetting some of those things, those small things that probably do count.
Yeah, yeah. funny thing is like where I've actually found the real value in it is I'll actually go back in the off season, when I'm not even really thinking about deer hunting. I mean, I'm kind of usually always thinking about it, but whenever I'm not like actively pursuing it, it's like,
Yeah.
um, March, whenever I'm starting to do scouting, what I mean, but I'm starting to think about next year, but I'm not really thinking about all the data that I've seen previously or whatever. Or even during the summer, it's like I have some free time. It's like, cause I keep them all in an app that I use, and I'll go through and I'll start looking at my notes and reading through the different spots that I hunted and reading through like the notes that I took for each spot. And then I use software that kind of aggregates my pictures, and then I can kind of label them and filter them and stuff like that. And I go back and I look at the weather related to those, and I'll just kind of peruse through. And it's one of those things like when you're not looking for something is when it pops out to you. And that's kind of how I've stumbled across some of that stuff. Cause I'd be like, oh, well, damn, like, look at that. There's trail camera pictures. It's the weather's that. And I'll go back and look at the historical weather and be like, oh, it was misty that day, or it was slightly rainy. And then I'll kind of look at my notes and be like, oh, well, what was the hunt like? And, I start to compare it, and that's whenever I start to see things. It's usually not in season necessarily. It's usually after the fact when I kind of do a debrief, right? Or if like, you doing what you do for a living. So if you have a really bad project, it's like you go back and you do a post-mortem on what happened.
Oh, yes.
It's the same thing. I just kind of go back after the season's over, whenever I had a little bit of time to get away from it, and do a little bit of a post-mortem on like the hunts and the spots and stuff like that, and see if there's anything else I can figure out from, the notes that I took.
Well, it's funny because a few years ago I was hunting a giant typical in Illinois. He was in the 180s. I got his sheds, so I know how big he was that year. And I was looking. I knew he was on the farm. I had a couple pictures of him, mostly just there in the summer. And I went back and I started digging through pictures, and I noticed, I was like, man, he got really, like, between like the 7th and 8th of November, he got really hot on this one particular field and this one little area of that field.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, and sometimes in deer hunting too, is a lot of times it's a gut feeling too.
Mm-hmm.
And you gotta, there's been some times over the years where I didn't follow my gut, and it cost me a big deer. And down that day, I just had a gut feeling. I was like, yeah, I got a feeling that deer's going to come out at that end of the farm based off of what he did the year before. And I went in there and set up that evening, and I was literally probably 20 yards too far off the mark. He came right out of that corner. Just like, I heard one big crack in the back, like a deer was chasing something back there. And then I heard one big, loud, deep grunt. And I'm glad nobody was sitting there with me, because I didn't even see the deer and I was already worked up. And I just in my head, I'm like, that's him. I know it. I know that's him. And I grabbed my bow, turned the camera on, and he came out of that corner that night. And he literally hit on 4 corners of that field. He hit 3 of them, except for the one corner I was at.
Right.
Chasing those. But I would have never set up in there if I wouldn't have went back. That I was the evening before that, I was just digging through pictures, and I looked and I was like, man, he was really active just right there in that tight little, 10-acre area. That's where he wanted to be, but he wanted to be out of that field. And I just went for gut feeling, and by looking at those pictures, I said, you know what, screw it. What I got to lose? I went in, set up, and 20 more yards, he would have been on my wall. But
right.
It didn't play out like that. But
yeah. How often when you're making decisions, because I know you're a super strategic guy, like you typically are hunting a specific buck, and you learn him, you know the property that you're hunting, and you have a plan, and and not saying that you don't adjust, because you do move midday, and you'll see something happen and you're not afraid to get down and move to try to get into the action or whatever the case is. But how often are you making decisions kind of with your gut on the fly that kind of flies in the face of all the information that you think you know?
90% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably 90% of the time. I mean, that's when I really started killing big deer consistently. Is when I started. I always have a plan. Especially, yeah, I mean, on farms, maybe I've been hunting for a long time or something like that. And there's a particular deer in there or something. Like, there's a lot of times where, I'll set some things up purposely, with maybe like a small little quarter-acre food plot, or just have some good access routes in and out, to cut them off, because even I put feed plots on a lot of the places that that I hunt here, but I think out of probably killed 25 deer over 125 inches, and I think I've shot 2 deer off a feed plot,
Right.
because it, you know I always looked at feed plots and just like, this is just a way for me to keep the does here,
Right.
and keep the bucks from hanging around. It's always seemed like it was like I always ended up killing them somewhere else, but it's I would say 90% of the time, like, there's sometimes where you just get a gut feeling, and I used to fight those gut feelings off and stay put. And then when I started getting a gut feeling about something, now, like, I'm like, quit fighting it, just go. And if you screw it up, so what? You know what? Regroup and go back at it again.
Yeah. That's one thing, I know you're good buddies with the DeQuistos, and that was one thing, just in talking to Cody, over the years, that really stuck with me, was when I was chatting with him. We were just talking about confidence in deer hunting, and kind of what you and I are chatting about, where it's like you have all these puzzle pieces, right? And you're in a tree, and you're sitting there and you're going, man, I just don't know if it's going to happen here. And he just point blank said, he's like, if you don't think you're going to kill the deer there, he's like, you never will. Why are you there?
For sure.
And it was kind of like a light bulb moment, where it's like, and I kind of took that to heart. And and so that was really, when I started being willing, just to kind of like, as soon as the thought crossed my mind that this might not be the right spot, I immediately forced myself to get down. I'm like, as soon as I think like, man, I just don't know if this is right, or if I'm like, oh, man, I think the wind might just be not quite right for this spot. It's as soon as that thought enters my mind, it's like I just immediately start tearing my stuff down. I'm like, all right, I got to get out of here, because one, I'm going to be distracted, if anything else, because I'm going to be thinking about what I should be doing next, and not be in the hunt there. And two, if you don't think it's going to happen there, then you're probably feeling like you're just wasting your time, which isn't where your headspace needs to be when you're trying to hunt a deer either.
And Cody's exactly right. I mean, and obviously he's proven that, over and over, that works. I mean, it's easy to get into your own head, but man, if you think that you're in the wrong spot, then, I mean, you've already taken yourself out of the game mentally. So you might as well get down and get your head right, and get into a situation that you feel like you're gonna have an opportunity. I could, 2 years ago, I went out and spent a week out at Andre's place hunting, and that guy he's 60 years old. He's hanging multiple sets every single day. Like, he's an animal. I mean, he gets after it. Like, and I didn't know how much of that he still did. Because he's got a nice farm out there, and he's done well for himself over the years, and he bought that farm right there where he lives, and there's stands everywhere. There's stands all over the place, and it is so funny how you spend that time. His approach, and the way that he goes about it, and his mobile hunting style is never changed. He's still constantly on the move, and hanging stands. We would hunt in the morning, and we get back, and we'd grab something to eat. He's like, dude, we gotta go scout hang stands. let's go. I'm like, yeah, let's go. And we would be out just running around looking for hot sign. And I killed my buck. I killed my buck one evening. And when I pulled that out, we took some pictures in the morning, and then we grabbed something to eat. And he goes, dude, I seen that 10 go across that field the other night. He goes, we got to go, run around, do some scouting. We went in, scouted a couple areas. We both weren't feeling it. We went into a spot and it was absolutely shredded. And we were like, it was like, he's setting the sticks. I'm handing him a stick. He's, we were on it. We just knew. The sign was red hot. We went back to the house, got changed, came back in there, and I would say within an hour to hour and a half, he shot that buck.
That's awesome. What was the big thing that you, so let me ask two questions. Was that the first question? Number one, is that the first time you've ever scouted and hunted with Andre? And two, what was your one key takeaway that you had from spending time with him?
No, it wasn't the first time. But we've never sat in a tree together.
Okay.
Before. But to be there for an entire week with him and it was like, and he hunts almost every single day of the year too. I don't know if a lot of people realize that. Trust me, me and Byron goes through his footage. He hunts every day.
Right.
There's no day off. It's like from October 1st all the way into late season. He's not taking off any days unless something family wise comes up and he is forced into it and he can't go.
Right.
But he's persistent. He's constantly scouting. Always looking for the latest, hottest sign. And like I said, it's kind of like all the tree stands that are on that farm, from him owning a tree stand company and all these tons of good spots. That week that I was there, him and I both shot bucks, and both stands were hung. Mine was hung the day before I killed my buck, and nobody had ever put a stand in that tree before. And then the buck that he shot, we hung that stand and had that deer killed. From the time we hung it, went back to the house, came back probably 3.5 hours later. So, it just goes to show to me, just being that mobile and, always being and hunting the hottest sign that you can get on. It's just, I think your odds just skyrocket. I'm getting a little bit of funk here. I would freaking openly admit this. It's because a couple of these farms that I hunt, I've hunted them for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll have some stands that I've had in some trees for a long time, and it is easy every once in a while to get right back into a little bit of a funk where it's just easy to go to something you already got hanging.
Yeah.
Rather than hang another set. But just like last year, I seen a deer do what he did, and I went in there and I moved that set in there and I killed that deer off right off the bat. I'm like, why did it take me all this time to do that?
Right. So, I think obviously, when you're hunting mobile like that too, you enjoy the benefit of a lot of first time sits. And so I'm always curious, how if you had to put a number on it, what percentage of the deer that you've killed over the years have been on first time sits versus not?
90.
Really? I always feel like those guys that kind of, because obviously Andre was one of the guys that, really kind of brought to the forefront, the whole kind of mobile hunting aspect of things. And and stuff that I've read by him or have listened to him, or, the one chance I actually had to talk to him, it's that first time sit is king, and so even though he might have like a million tree stands hung, like, and he might be 60 years old, like he still knows at the end of the day, it's like, man, that ambush of the first time sit is like, there's nothing better. Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, he's still, I mean, it was funny too, because just spending that time with him out there too, like before he killed that deer, like every time he hung a set in the middle of the day, because a lot of times he'd hang a set and then hunt it that evening, and then come right back and then hunt it that next morning. It was always funny. I was getting a kick out of it because it was always like he was all giddy about hunting that stand for the first time.
Right.
I could just tell it. I was like, this is the first time he ever went out and hung a stand for the first time and was going to jump in it for the first. I mean, he goes, dude, I love a virgin set. I love it. Yeah. I can't wait.
Well, yeah, it gets you fired up, and like going back to what we were saying with the whole confidence thing, like if you don't think you're going to kill a deer there, why are you there? When you hang that stand, like, especially when it's fresh, you know what I mean? When you hung it, when you scouted, you found the sign and you hung it, like your confidence is through the roof because you hung it for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't it wasn't something you hung in June or, August or whatever, you know what I mean? And that you're coming back to 4 months later where you're probably, if you're being honest with yourself, you probably almost kind of forget why you hung it there to a degree, you know what I mean? And that shine kind of wears off of it. But whenever you're scouting, you find it, you hang it. It's like, man, like I know whenever I'm scouting and I find a tree, even like in March, when I find a tree and I'm like, and I find a spot and I'm like, oh man. And I start picking out trees and I'm going, okay, I think I would hunt this one on this wind. I could possibly get away with this wind on this one. I start to get butterflies in my stomach. Like, I legit get that excited where I start to get butterflies in my stomach where it's like, I just want to actually get up into the tree. I want it to happen now because I'm picking it because I have a reason to pick it. And, I think there's something to that, man. I mean, I think you partially, like, you will some of this stuff to happen.
Oh, I truly believe that. I mean, I think it's like it's the overwhelming confidence that it gives you, like when you come into one of those spots that just, I mean, the sign's just red hot, or you see the deer do something, and it's just like, last year when I killed that buck, I text my buddy Heath, Cisco, and Andre, and I said, I'm killing that freaking thing tonight. And Andre texts me back. He says, "Oh, it's like that, huh?" And I said, "I'll text you in a little bit." And I was joking around, just with my good buddies, but deep down inside, I'm like, no, really, I kill it here.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome, man. So, mentioned earlier, I know you really like to kind of target a specific deer. Like you're kind of, a one deer guy, for lack of a better way to put it, right? You find one you really want to go after that fits kind of your criteria of maturity and stuff like that you want to chase. What is your general, knowing that that's kind of your approach in general, what does your trail camera strategy look like whenever you're trying to either gather inventory or whatever the case is? I guess just walk me through like the seasonal kind of changes of your trail camera strategy. Like imagining this time of year, you're thinking velvet and then you're transitioning as fall comes. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. This time of year, I'm just running cameras on minerals, and that kind of stuff, and just kind of getting a general understanding of like who made it, kind of thing. And I mean, once season, and here's the other thing too. So once you get like closer to season, and once you get into September and the velvet starts coming off, I mean, I got a couple of deer that I know for a fact they will not be on me since I'm
right.
And I know of one particular deer. He'll be down the road about 4 miles away on my buddy's place, and he'll show up down there. He's like, "Yep, he just showed up on camera down there now," and he'll be there all year. And so I never have it. There's some deer that you just never have a chance at. You can try to gain access and stuff like that, which that's one thing I work a ton on. But when I start to, to get in the season, I just kind of want to get a general understanding of where the deer is kind of coming and going, and where it's feeding. And sometimes I might jump in a tree like 3-4 days before season and just sit way back and just watch, because I know this, and I've been a victim of this a few times. Cameras don't tell you everything, and sometimes we start relying on those things too much. I've been there, and I've done that, and there's been some times where I've just spent the time and used some glass and kind of got told a little different story than what I thought the camera was telling me. And I think that's a good approach, because early season is hands down my favorite. I typically spend November going out of state and hunting. So I spent October just, trying to pinpoint the one deer that I want to go after. And so a lot of times for me, my trail camera strategy is more on food sources. I don't, if I put cameras back into like a bedding area or like a tight travel corridor that maybe I wouldn't hunt unless it was November or something like that, a lot of those cameras, I never even check them until after season. Okay. And I'll just let them soak. I'll just let them soak the whole season. And a lot of times, those are the cameras that when I am trying to figure out some of that stuff on a particular deer, and I knew that deer from the year before, then I'll go back into those pictures and say, oh, you know what? I remember I had this camera that was back in there. And I don't want to go back in there, because a lot of the places I hunt are a lot of small woodlots.
Right.
So sometimes I don't have a real good option to just go in there and just start kicking deer around. So I'll go and they'll just kind of take a look at those pictures and say, okay, just kind of start piecing it together a little bit based off of the year before back in there and the current cameras that I have. And then from there, sometimes then I might, like I said, have an observation set or two. And then once I lay eyes on the animal, on where he's coming out and what he was doing, then I make a move. Then I just go
in and get the job done, essentially. If it's surgically extract him.
Yep.
So with that early part of the season being kind of your favorite, because I know you like to travel later in the year. Like, do you? So always, people for the longest time said you can't kill anything in the mornings in October. Like, don't even bother. You should always hunt evening. What do you prefer in October? Are you a morning guy? Are you an evening guy? What's your situation?
It seems like the evenings are better for me in the early season in October. But if you can figure out a deer that's coming back from feeding and hitting a scrape on the way to his bed, that's like taking candy from a baby. That right there is key when you can find those types of spots. I killed a buck on Addictions a couple years ago. That's what he was doing, and I killed him on October 15th in the morning on a scrape. He hit a scrape, and then he was coming through, and then he had another scrape that he was getting ready to hit.
So, how close were you? Do you think to where he was laying his head down?
I would say over there, I would say probably 150 yards, 200 yards ish, somewhere.
What was the I guess temp, moon, all that stuff? Was there something that told you? I mean, what told you could kill that deer? I guess in the morning.
So I had to go on a work trip, and one of the guys I was on a work trip, he's a big bow hunter too. He kills some studs, and I had a cell cam back in there, and I'd set that. I went over there and set one time, and I had somebody's dogs come through that evening, and we're just jacking around in there the whole evening. I ended up getting down earlier, and so then I really didn't have anything. I was just kind of waiting because that spot kind of like I need an east wind to hunt in there, and there's some pine trees in there that typically I'll get into, and so I went back in there, or I was on this work trip, and I noticed on my camera how that deer was like showing up, like, you know, coming through there, like just as it's getting ready to start to break daylight. And then, like, for the next couple of days, and based on the way the moon was positioned, that it was kind of, it was creeping towards, it was coming off of a full moon. And it was like a couple of days after that full moon, I noticed that he started to get a little bit later until like it was the day that I was getting ready to come back from that work trip, and he broke daylight in there. And I told my buddy, I said, I'm gonna go in there and kill that deer tomorrow. I'm like, he's gonna walk through there and shoot it with shooting light tomorrow. I'm like, look at these 3 days, what he's done. And I said, the only thing that I can base it on is like nothing weather-wise has changed. And I said, all I need is an east wind. I got that east wind, and that deer came through right at 7:30, 8 o'clock or whatever there in the morning, and was working those scrapes, and I killed him October 15th. And I think that had to do, the wind did switch. Well, I had a little bit of a nippy wind that morning, but I got away with it somehow. And what helped me too is he didn't cut too far to my left. If he would have cut farther to the left, I would have probably got busted. But he stayed a little more to my right, which helped me. So I was just out of that, just on the edge of him cracking me. And I think that particular case, it all had to do with that moon.
That's interesting, man. Like, I guess so. How much do you follow? Like, do you follow like the overhead underfoot type of stuff, or do you more so follow? Because I've heard different guys kind of they use the moon differently, right? And some guys, really kind of religiously will follow that overhead underfoot, moon. And then other guys will be more so where they don't really pay attention to it much until it gets either on like 3-4 days prior to a full moon, and then 3-4 days on the backside of a full moon. What's your approach to using the moon?
So I'm never going to be a guy that like, it's, it's a bad moon phase, I'm not going to hunt.
Right.
Kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I believe in that. But what I do believe in is like what you were just saying. Like, I want to use the moon to my advantage, whether that be I know that the deer, it's gonna put the deer feeding a little later on the fields in the morning, where I can catch them going back to bed, or catch them in their bedding area or something like that, or maybe it's during late October through November or something like that, and you got a full moon or something like that, where the action is going to be, like you're going to have a little more from that 11 to 2 o'clock, and it's going to be like you're going to see some good stuff then, where like, but it's going to be kind of dead in the morning, it's kind of dead towards the end of the evenings.
Right.
So I'll kind of play that a little bit. But the one thing I know, this is just my take on it. I can be completely wrong, but this is just the way I see it. The 4 days going into a full moon,
Mhm.
I feel like those 4 days going into a full moon is awesome evening hunting. I've had really, really good luck then. Then there's like a 2 or 3 day span in between there where it's like a little bit of hit or miss, a little bit of a lull in the action, and it's kind of a little, I can't seem to predict that as much. Then you go the 4 days after that, then it seems like it gets really good in the mornings.
Yeah, that's typically how I've always used it. And to your point, it's like I don't hunt. I'm not gonna not hunt because it's a bad mood or whatever it is. You know, I'm a working dude like everybody else, so it's like when I have time to get out, I try to get out. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that I do look at the moon and I'm looking for that full moon when it is, and and what days of the season related to October are those falling on? Especially like that 15th-ish time frame. I know you and I talked about this when I was driving the other day, but that has fast become probably my favorite time to hunt, is at like 13th through the 20th. And there's a bunch of different reasons, but like for, that I've just found that I have the best encounters and I can actually predict a little bit more what is going to happen. I can actually use my scouting, put it that way. I can actually use the intel that I gathered. I can actually use it during that time of year. You just have to be willing to kind of get in the mix because they're just not showing themselves out in the wide open yet and acting stupid like they will, later in the year. So you got to kind of be a little bit dialed in. But if you are, that time of year is killer. And that is whenever I will pay attention to the moon, to the backside and the front side. I prefer the front side just because I prefer the morning hunts. I've just seemed to have my best encounters in the morning, at least around here. It might be different in different places, but at least my home state around where I live, that's at least what I've seen. And the interesting thing is that my camera intel wouldn't necessarily tell me that. Like my camera intel doesn't suggest that. It's just everything that I've seen in observation has been, as far as like encounters go and stuff like that, has told me this area, that time frame, morning hunts, I just have the best hunts.
Yeah, and it's been kind of it's been my personal experience is October has been better. The evenings have been better for me in October, where the mornings are better for me in November.
Interesting.
And I could definitely go back and look at, most of my deer and say, most of the deer that I ever killed in October, besides maybe one or two, were all evenings where November, it's probably just opposite of that.
Right. So that for that particular hunt you were talking about, that you got an east wind and that's why you were able to get in there to kill him. But you were saying that your setup was like, a little bit like you were like, maybe this is good, maybe this isn't, maybe it's not the best. It ended up working out because he came in where he needed to be to kill him. How do you go about selecting the correct tree? Because I think a lot of folks get hung up in trying to cover almost too much area, and they try to pick a tree where they can get to everything, and then in doing that they really don't have an opportunity at anything. How do you go about picking your tree? And then I guess we can talk about wind off that as well, how you kind of think about wind in relationship to picking your tree.
So I was that guy at one point.
I think we all were at some point.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. That was me. I was rolling like that for a while. And I took myself out of contention on so many different bucks over the years when I was doing that and just trying to, cover too much and give them too much, to where now, I want a 20-yard shot. I want a 15, 20-yard shot. That is like ideal. So a lot of times it's it's getting in there, poking around, not being afraid to screw up something, kind of playing those scenes out in your head, like having your imagination kind of like of what you think the deer's going to do based off of the sign that you're seeing, whether that's tracks or rubs or scrapes or what, or terrain features. I mean, terrain features probably more importantly than anything. Sometimes, and just kind of playing out in your head to where I think your instincts will take over, and eventually, like, you'll end up at the tree of like, okay, if I'm here, with this particular wind, based off of this sign, roughly I'm within 15, 20 yards of where I think this deer is coming, and getting out of the mindset of like, but if I go over here, then I'll be able to shoot over here, 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 here. Like, I think you need to get to the mindset of like, that's the trail.
Right.
That's the one trail that I cannot get no farther than 20 yards from it.
Yeah.
And then trying to pick out the correct tree, because I don't think a big deer just randomly walks. I think these, he hasn't got to that point in his 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old life without being pretty methodical of himself.
Yeah.
And some of the things that he's doing. But I also think too that, and I'll always believe this, that at the end of the day, it's an animal. There's no freaking way that animal is smarter than me. There's absolutely not a chance in hell that animal is smarter than me. And I think sometimes there is times that we do give them a little too much credit.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree with that, man, because I think what they have is not necessarily intelligence. It's just like superior awareness is what they have.
Yes.
And that they're just so in tune with their surroundings, things that we overlook and don't recognize as disturbances are huge disturbances to them. It's like, and I think we mistake that for intelligence. But I'm curious when you set up, because I've talked to different guys and guys have different approaches, right? Like for me, typically whenever I'm hunting in an area, when I set up, if let's just say it's in and around a scrape or whatever sign it is, like I want to be able to shoot to that. Like that's like the thing that I'm prioritizing, because I almost treat it as like a destination location. And that's a very kind of like John Eberhart approach, right? And that's kind of, one of the things I kind of picked up from him. There's other guys, when I talk to guys like Nathan Killen or whomever, where it's like he doesn't necessarily hunt on the sign. Rarely does he hunt on the sign. He hunts, anywhere from like 50, 60 yards off of like, a rub line or like a big scrape or whatever the case is. Like, what's your approach to that? Are you an on the sign guy, or are you playing how that deer might approach that sign instead?
Situational.
Yeah.
I think each situation is different. And I think based on what kind of terrain that you're hunting, I think at times where, there's times where it's like, you know what, I have to hunt on the sign and be a little more on top of this, where other times, hunting on the sign is probably going to get me busted based off of the wind, or maybe particular, trees that are over there to set up in or whatever, because I want to be, I mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to complete the most utter surprise possible.
Right.
And I, it's all situational. I mean, I think there's times too where it helps just to maybe take, if you're going to set right up on that sign, maybe go walk 10 yards towards the other direction that you were possibly thinking about, and just kind of look back and say, okay, no, you know what? Like, I'm not going to get cracked up there. I'm going to get away with it, because there's been plenty of times where I turn around like, oh my God,
Right.
and this is not going to work. So then, in that case, I would take more of Nathan's approach
Right.
and go over there, because I know Nathan. He's a friend of mine, and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
That's for darn sure. That guy he's a heck of a hunter and probably even a better person.
Yeah. 100% agree with you there, man. So, man, we've been going at this for a little while, and I want to be sensitive to your time, but I do have two last questions for you. So,
Mm-hmm.
the first one is, I always like to kind of, get a sense of like what that watershed moment was for people, because I think sometimes, uh, people who are just, still kind of learning or whatever, it's like they're kind of trying to figure out like what's that thing that's going to help me get over the hump to a degree. You know what I mean? And it could be a multitude of things, but I'm always curious for different guys what that is. So is there a moment that you can look back on and you can say, man, when I learned this thing, strategy, tactic, whatever it is, when I learned this thing, that's when I really started to feel like I was hitting my stride and knew what I was doing, and I was getting the encounters I wanted to have, and eventually, the deer started falling.
Um, it's going to kind of be two-parted.
Yeah.
Because one part of it is, you can't kill what's not there.
Mhm.
So you have to be able to get access to pieces that have the kind of deer that you're looking for. And do not get married to one piece. Just because you got permission on one particular piece and you've been hunted since you were 10 years old or whatever, all I can say to that is like, keep knocking on doors, keep networking, keep trying to find more ground to hunt, because you don't know when that is going to change hands. And, and when you might not have access to hunt that piece anymore or whatever. So the one thing I will definitely say is get as much ground as you possibly can get access to. And I spend a lot of time doing a lot of research, talking to a lot of different people, trying to get leads on new ground. And I'm not talking leases. I'm talking 75 to 80% of the stuff that I hunt is permission pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And take the time every year. Don't get too comfortable with what you have, because you can lose it. And I've lost some really good stuff in the middle of season before.
That sucks.
And that sucks, because especially when other people that are maybe, relatives or closer friends or whatever know that there's a really big deer around, boy, things change quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just have some options in your back pocket, have some other, work at that. I mean, when February, March, April comes around, that's my time to like, okay, let's get after this and let's get some new ground to hunt, because I don't want to ever be in a situation of, because I've been there,
Right.
and it's not fun, of not having a place, a place to get in and hunt. I mean, there's, I got some public and stuff like that around me around here, but it gets slammed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it absolutely torched. So I always want to have plenty of new stuff, or because there's a lot of that stuff I never even hunt in here, because it didn't have that deer that I was looking for. But that doesn't mean it's not going to have that deer that I'm looking for next year.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, I think that's sage advice. I always like to have plan A through Z. Whatever might happen during the course of the year. But I think the other kind of unintended consequence / benefit of that is, as you continue to get more properties, especially for maybe a younger hunter or someone who's really trying to level up their game, is that it forces you to then go have to scout those places. And I've always found scouting new places is oftentimes where I start to like explore things that maybe were unfamiliar to me in the past that now all of a sudden
Hmm.
become part of my arsenal or understanding of how deer behave, you know? Um, so that's like, I think one of the unintended consequences. Do you kind of feel the same way that like whenever you find a new piece or when you have to kind of learn a new piece, that blank slate is, I mean, it's a challenge, but it also
Yeah,
forces you to kind
that's
of really dig in.
but that's exciting. You know, that's
Yeah.
really like new ground excites me. I mean, that's I like really, really get into that part of it. Sometimes I could get a little bit bored hunting the same farms year after year.
Yeah.
Where sometimes when you get on a new piece and you get access, it's like, oh, yeah. I mean, it's just like I just feel like a kid in a candy store, man. I'm just like, oh yeah, this is awesome. Like, you know,
I hear you.
that fires me up. Like I really get excited about that.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
some
I think
Go ahead.
going back to the other point, the other part of this, one thing I was going to say is like, you know, try to get good at a lot of different things
Mm.
in this, you know, and you know, try to always stop and stop and listen to a guy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's the one thing I like about like all you guys that are doing these podcasts and stuff like that. Man, I wish you guys were doing this stuff back in the day when I was starting. Because God, this would have like purged a lot of headaches and like I would. I mean, it's there's so much good information out there from a lot of good hunters, a lot of guys that are a lot better hunter than me, and I think take a little piece of a little bit of everything and try different things and see what works for you because I'm sure you tried things before that didn't work for you that works for another guy and vice versa. And I know that I have and but I think you just gotta like be willing to adapt and try new things.
Yeah, I think it goes back to something you said earlier about, being, not afraid to fail at some things. I think it kind of goes back to that kind of idea where, you know, whatever information you can take in is good information. You just need to filter it at some point and use what works for you. It's like there's certain things that people do that I know. I mean, I know it works for them, but for whatever reason, whether it's it might be something where they're really, really patient with this particular tactic and they have really great success at it. But my personality is just not. I'm not a super patient person, and so I know it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I've tried it and it just doesn't work for me. I'm much better of being aggressive and feeling like I'm always in the game as opposed to like waiting. I want to press the action as opposed to wait. And
Yeah.
that's and so over time it's like I've kind of learned that, because I've tried it both ways and I've figured out like, okay, that doesn't work for me. Doesn't mean it doesn't work, but it just doesn't work for me. And the whole idea of being multiple is something that I've been kind of on a quest to do. It's like I always kind of equate it to like a 3-4 defense. I'm a big Steeler fan, so like their defense was always very multiple, which meant they could just kind of adapt and match up however they needed to from game to game. And I've really tried to make that a point of my evolution over the past several years of like challenging myself to hunt different terrain, different types of properties, hunt multiple properties, public, private, whatever the case is, travel out of state to new states to see different country, to hunt different country that I'm unfamiliar with, hunt on the ground, hunt from a tree, like whatever it is, I want to be able to do it all, and
Yeah.
in that, and it's interesting because in that process, like I learned to enjoy hunting even more than I was before.
Hmm.
If that
Yeah.
was possible, because it was, I never felt like I was going into a hunt and felt like I wasn't prepared to meet whatever the challenge was, you know. Um, but anyway, man, last question, dude.
Yeah.
Always like to end on this one. You have your life depends on it. You need 3 buck tags filled, and you can
Yeah.
choose 3 hunters from anywhere, alive, dead, famous, not famous, buddies down the street, whatever the case is. Your life depends on these 3 tags getting filled. Who are you putting on your team?
Oh well, definitely put my buddy Andre on that team
Good choice.
because because you know if I was a big deer and he was after me, I'd be
Yeah.
freaking nervous.
Yeah.
Um, he would definitely be one. Um, um, uh, my buddy Heath Cisco.
Another good one.
Yeah, he's another one that I would definitely put in there. Gosh, I got some buddies that are way better hunters than me, so I'm like trying to not, I'm trying to choose wisely here in my last one here.
Right.
I'd probably put my old buddy mountain man Troy Pottinger on that list out there in Idaho. You can't help but give him a ton of credit for the stuff that he's been doing his whole journey.
Yeah.
And he's I mean those three guys, I'm telling you right now, if I was a big deer, I would be freaking scared out of my mind if one of those three were out after me.
Yeah, I would flee whatever state I was in, whatever state they were in, and I was in the same state. I would be fleeing that state. That would be the only way I would feel comfortable surviving.
Yep. Troy's coming out here to hunt with me this year.
Oh, is he really? Nice. I'm actually headed to Idaho. I might get a chance to sync up with. I'm going out for an elk hunt, so I might get a chance.
Are you?
Yeah, I might get a chance to meet up with him while I'm out there. I'm on a pretty tight schedule though, because I'm going out for the opener and work schedule and stuff like that. I think I'm going to get there like the day before the opener and then hunt for like 6 or 7 days, I think. So we'll see if I have some free time.
Dude, if you get a chance, hang out with him because he's fun to hang out with because he is wound tight.
Yeah, I can tell, man, just from our conversations. I love talking to him, and we'll text back and forth and stuff like that. And he's a hoot, man. So I enjoy spending time with him. But before I let you get going, brother, why don't you let folks know where they can follow you, follow what you're doing with hunting, and anywhere else where they can pick up any of your content.
You can Lone Wolf Custom Gear. I handle all the staff for Whitetail Addictions. You can follow me. I don't really do much on Facebook anymore. That's kind of more family stuff for me anymore. But on Instagram at Mason's Dad 1975. But yeah, just our Lone Wolf Custom Gear YouTube channel. We got some content that I work on there with Byron Horton. But yeah, any of those places.
Awesome, yeah. I mean, folks should go check out the YouTube channel because there's some killer hunts on there. I find myself going down the rabbit hole quite frequently, and actually even rewatching some of the hunts. I just watched one of yours. I want to say it was two weeks ago. I forget which deer it was. I want to say you were hunting that deer for a couple of years, if I wasn't mistaken.
Which one was?
I don't think it was from last. Well, it might have been from 2 years ago, possibly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. There's probably 1, 2, 3, 4. I probably got 7 or 8 kills on there. Just self-film stuff that, and then we got all of our episodes right. We got 7 or 8 episodes done right now. We got some really good hunts. We got some younger guys that we've picked up too, that's on our staff too, and they're killers, and they're on public ground, and they're killing some studs and consistently doing it, and they're fun. I've enjoyed helping Byron put these together. It's been kind of fun to watch these guys. It kind of takes me back a little bit too, of like when I was first starting and getting into it. I see, you can almost see yourself in some of this stuff.
Right. Right. That's awesome, man. But yeah, folks should go check it out. A lot of great hunting content, brother. I appreciate you coming on, dude. We need to stay in touch. It's been fun catching up with you, but it's been fun getting to know you, and good luck this upcoming season, man.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus, and Skull Brew Coffee Company. And until next time, We'll see y'all.